Hello and welcome to On the Record. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. It's been 3 years since the FNM has been governing, and what a 3 years it's been. From Hurricane Dorian to the COVID-19 pandemic, they've had to lead through some of the country's most difficult times. But could it have been done better? Amidst the crises and chaos, the Progressive Liberal Party has been quite vocal about the government's mistakes, failure to provide transparency, and inability to lead during times of crises. Tonight, we sit with representatives of the Progressive Liberal Party as we discuss governance during crisis, the opposition's perspective. Don't go anywhere. Our discussion begins on the other side of this break. The project really pays itself back.
Correct.
They set up
at the conference, the school.
As a journalist, I always have to focus on the facts, and sometimes that means going to investigate for myself. On the Record, Thursdays at 8 p.m. right here on RTV.
Welcome back. You're watching On the Record. Our topic tonight is governance during crisis, the opposition's perspective. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer, and again, thanks for tuning in. In a democratic country, opposition counts. It provides a much-needed system of checks and balances and ensures transparency, accountability, and responsibility. My guest for this portion of the show has agreed to such task and ensures that every time the Senate meets, she advocates for such measures. She is an attorney by profession and is none other than PLP Senator JoBeth Coleby-Davis. Welcome back to On the Record.
Thank you.
We were talking just before the show started. It's been a long time since you've been here.
Yes,
and you've been busy.
I have been.
How is work in opposition, I've got to ask?
It's a task. Obviously that I signed up for, but it's quite a lot of work to do because in opposition, not only are you still trying to hold the government's feet to the fire in terms of policies, initiatives that they would have promised to bring to the Bahamian people, but you're also trying to ensure you're rebuilding your machinery and preparing and getting yourself prepared for election and becoming a new government for the people. So platform, policies, all of that background work internally is still something that you're a part of that process whilst also fighting on behalf of the Bahamian people. Interesting,
you should use the word fight. You have been, you've really established yourself in the Senate, and I've got to congratulate you for that. You know, the Senate or the upper chamber doesn't not necessarily get, you know, the same coverage and even doesn't always have the same prominence as the House of Assembly. But you certainly established yourself. I'm going to start with something that happened just recently in the Senate. There was a heated row in the upper chamber after you accused the Minnis administration of catering to the rich and said the budget reflects gross incompetence, political favoritism, and a lack of compassion. Elaborate with us on why you and how you would have come to those conclusions.
Well, if you look at first of all, there was a budget communication that was presented by the Deputy Prime Minister. And in his communication, there was reflecting on how they would advance the country. They were using terms of revitalization, re-energizing, things of that nature. But when you look at the actual budget and how funding of revenue stream, borrowings, and the recurring expenditures were calculating, it was apparent that it's very unrealistic. They were saying things that sounded good, but the action behind what they were saying, it was evident that they weren't going to be able, or they are not going to be able to achieve the things that they're doing because of how they managed the system previously. You had time from you entered to build upon NHI. You had time from you entered to build upon BAMSI, to encourage the farmers who I would interject that the PM ran away from when they went to meet with him some time ago. So you had the time to do and put in the groundwork that you would have needed if you saw some inconsistencies, if you saw some things or policy decisions that you didn't like from the PLP. You had the time. You had 3 years to do it. So you come before us now with this big, glorious budget, but the recurring expenditures and some of the revenue stream and how you have sliced it up and where you have put the money, it doesn't make sense. It didn't add up. You were given less to social services. You gave them something, but you gave them 20%, and you're now predicting above 30% in unemployment. So how do you manage that? Before COVID, we had about 20% unemployment and victims from Dorian who had to get assistance from social services. So a 20% increase to social services from about 48 million to 60-some million, that is not sufficient. Things of that nature. So it shows you either you don't care or you're just incompetent to what should happen in these circumstances, or you already use up all of your funds to benefit your favorites.
When you consider that this particular government has had to deal with the largest natural disaster we've ever had as a country, and then a global pandemic, and then you put that against the budget presentation, what should they have done differently, or what could have been done differently or better from your perspective?
I think the biggest issue that this government, well, there's a lot of issues with them, let me correct that. But two of the biggest issues I would say with them is they don't listen. They can't take any constructive criticism. That's a big problem because they're managing off of their emotions, how they feel. That's how it seems. When they wake up and they think, this is how we're going to do it, they do it. So they have NEMA, which they could have just restructured to make it efficient and effective during Dorian cleanup and relief efforts. But no, they went and brought a disaster ministry, who, by the way, I don't understand how that ministry is being managed, because the little bit of money that they've put into the ministry, I think it is about $1 or $2 million. How can you run a ministry with that amount of money that is supposed to be the disaster management authority?
So you're saying that ministry should not have been created.
Why did you bring it when you're not even properly funding it so that it can effectively do its job? It's just a bunch of bureaucracy, a bunch of red tape. So the management of crisis, if you are listening and if you are doing things that are efficient and effective to actually respond to the needs that exist presently in your country, then of course things would almost balance itself out. But their problem is they're not listening. When the opposition say, maybe we should look at it this way, they just find, oh, you just opposing for opposing. No, sometimes you should just sit back and say, well, maybe they're making a good choice. You're the government. So us giving you a option to do things possibly this way, it's not taking away the fact that the Bahamian people voted you in to lead. Doesn't take away that you are the prime minister or you are the leaders in the country. It's just now that as a Bahamian and a part of opposition, we are looking at it from a different scope, and maybe it should be done that way.
Are we looking at, or are we seeing now politics really going to a new low in terms of the pettiness that seems to be going back and forth? Have we gotten to that point?
I feel in the conversation that when you would hear just on the outside, just average persons, average Bahamians, I feel as if some part of it is our fault as leaders, because some actions of some of our leaders has been extremely petty, to the point where Bahamians are just fed up and they're exhausted with the system. It is like, can you just, for once, vote in a government, vote in a leader, and they just get to work and lead the people because we are Bahamians, not because I am F&M, and so I'm an F&M government, and I'm going to make sure F&Ms are straight. Not because I'm a PLP, so I'm going to make sure PLPs, y'all good? Okay. Can we get leaders that come in and they effectively lead the Bahamian citizens, residents, visitors, because they are in this country and they see them as their responsibility to do what's necessary to care for them. That's where Bahamian people would want the discussions to go now. They don't want the pettiness. They don't want the back. Sometimes we laugh, we throw jazz or whatever, but they really just want leaders to lead.
I will
for
agree
all.
with you on that. People are very fatigued and exhausted about the constant back and forth. I'm going to go now to something that you would have raised about the public service and a reduction in the public service or the size of it, which is later clarified by the Minister of Labour, Dion Folks, who said that no one was fired, but numbers reduced as a result of deaths and resignation. Do you accept what he said as truth?
No.
Why not?
Because you know what? It's funny that on our feet, you can put it however you want to put it. You can explain it however you want. And no disrespect to the Minister of Labor because I'm good friends with his daughter. So, no disrespect to him. But in terms of the realities, you are faced with people calling you. I'm now considered a politician, even though I don't like to call myself or identify myself as a politician, but being in the forefront, people find it as you will speak on my behalf. So we've had calls, I still have messages in my inbox. I got messages on that day when I stood on my feet and said about public service being let go. I got messages from people saying you are absolutely right. They ended my contract as soon as they came into government because someone pointed out I was at a rally or I'm a PLP. So you have those type of conversations that are in flux, and whether it was contracts expired or not, the way by which it was done, people take that as you did it because of my affiliation, not because my contract was up.
It is no secret that the public service is oversized and has a lot of inefficiencies. We as Bahamians suffer through the inefficiencies and ineffectiveness of the public service. So how do you now justify that when, consecutive governments have been crying out for public sector and public service reform?
Well, do a proper reform. And in order to do a proper reform, you have to go in and investigate what are the challenges, where the inefficiencies lie, and how you can move persons around. But also, with moving around, you have to make sure that you're bringing in someone who's going to actually perform better or perform to the level where we are requiring them to perform. Not someone you're moving, someone that got the training. Just the revenue enhancement unit, for instance. They removed the entire unit who were charged with collecting our VAT taxes from companies and whomever individuals required to pay it, right? You remove the entire unit. Then you bring in a new unit of people saying you're revamping, but these new people have to go through the training that the unit already had. So if you remove a unit, and you're bringing in new people, the time that you're using to train the new team, you're costing the country because now we have a problem with collecting the taxes. So it just doesn't work that way. You can't just go in and move without you properly taking a step back and saying, wait a minute, let me look in and see where the problems lie. Let me try to fix it. And then let me craft out a plan to make it better. Not to just send people home and no explanation to them, no explanation to the public, and then you're costing the country because now you have a backlog because the new people have to get trained before they can work.
Just recently, you made headlines as a result of a heated exchange in the Senate between you and the Attorney General Carl Bethel, bringing in as well the opposition, leader of opposition business, Fred Mitchell. Take us to that point and really what happened that day that angered you so much that led to the comments that went public?
Well, I was in my debate, and I'm always so cautious in what I'm saying, how I present myself. So I try to make sure that I do everything in my power to prepare as good as I can before I stand on my feet and speak. And so, obviously, I may have triggered something on the governing side in my speech. It may have been a hard reality to them. I was very passionate at this budget because it just seemed like it was so much time wasted, and now we're here where we have 2 disasters, and you're now having to tell people you're going to have to suffer for a little bit, when if you did what you had to do, we may have had some cushion to fall on. So I was very passionate about this budget, and I felt before I entered that it was going to cause some uproar because it's going to be a harsh reality that they had to face. And it probably did. And so the Attorney General, in trying to respond to one of the comments I would have made instead of just responding, because I was saying the government was misleading the public by the BPL press release coming out after the communication, when the BPL cost now has to be incurred by us. So it takes our deficit up instead of what they originally projected. So I was saying it was misleading, and he got up and he said, I don't think the senator understands the budget, and that triggered me.
Why?
Because I do my best. I am not here to play politics. I'm not here to be petty. I am doing it based on how I see it, based on contacting persons who would be more inclined to understand some portions of the budget that I would inquire of them, so they are experts or in their field. And so I would go out of my way to research and get the information before I compile all of it into a speech. So for you to stand up publicly on the record and try to insult me when no part of my speech is targeting anyone personally, it is saying what I am getting and what I'm interpreting. As a lawyer, you have laws, and we go before the court and we interpret the laws and we fight cases for clients the way we interpret it. And precedents are set. Even though the law said one thing, the judge makes a final ruling and that becomes a precedent. It's how things work. So don't insult me because I interpret it and I have put it to the Bahamian people one way and you don't agree with it. And then while I was responding, he used the term young lady. So my husband was reminding me I was still arguing about the insult, and Senator Mitchell was trying to deal with the young lady part, and I caught on at the end saying, well, I demand an apology for that too. And it's because women, we struggle in terms of really offering ourselves for the public life. We have that issue here in the country. And so I didn't want to allow that to just be left alone. I wanted it to be answered right away.
Senator, we are going to take a break. Stay with us. When we come back, Senator Coleby-Davis gives us her view on the FNM's handling of Dorian and the Andrus proposal. You don't want to miss it. Welcome to On the Record.
Looking for more On the Record? If you miss our Thursday showing at 8 p.m., join us for the re-airing on Friday mornings at 10, and then again each Sunday night at 8:30. Or go to our YouTube channel and catch up on all of our past episodes. And then like our Facebook and Instagram pages for a preview of upcoming shows and get a chance to ask your questions. Just look for On the Record.
Watching On the Record, this segment is made possible by Executive Printers. Still in studio with us tonight is PLP Senator JoBeth Coleby-Davis. Thank you so much for staying with us. May 22nd, the remains of 55 victims of Hurricane Dorian were laid to rest in Abaco, causing a lot of backlash. Your position on what went wrong with this, what should have been done differently?
I get so emotional sometimes when I think about how we had human body remains sitting in a trailer over 8 months. Families requesting to get a DNA to see if they can get their loved one bodies and put them to rest, lay them to rest. And the time that it took for us to just come to some conclusion and give them some sort of relief, some sort of memorial service to bring comfort or peace to them, even having experienced it 8 months later, and they had to suffer again with the fact that it was it looked disorganized. They had to stand away from the actual ceremony. All of the officials, no relations to the persons who may have passed, or no connection really to what transpired during Dorian, are seated under a tent comfortably. And they call this a national service. Even if COVID was the reason why, more provisions should have been made for the families to be comfortable at the setting. They could have offered more tents where they had them stood and chairs and seats and make the process a little bit more comforting, knowing what they've already experienced and the time that it took for them to get there. I thought it took extremely too long for the government to answer the call and bring some relief to the family.
Do you think there needs to be an inquest?
Oh, most definitely, because I can't understand what took, and I don't want to make it seem as if someone was incompetent or just careless. So I think an inquiry, people want answers. They want to know, why did it take this long? Who family members did you put to rest? How are you properly able to calculate and determine whether these were not still mixed up in the missing numbers? Or, you know, how are you able to certainly say to us, those 55 persons are noted as 55 that passed, these are their names, these are who they are, and they are not calculating any other number and, you know, moving right along. How can people move past this without getting some type of definitive answer as to what transpired from the storm hit to the day they laid them to rest?
One of the things that continues to stand out is the back and forth with the numbers of reported missing from the hurricane. What does this say to you about how we handled and continue to handle this disaster?
Poor, very poor. And the fact that there's so much backlash, even now, from the former Minister of Health, stating that he even thought the way in which they compiled the numbers or how it was managed when it was removed from his authority to the office of the Prime Minister, and then numbers change and this one was removed, this amount was removed. It's just horrible to show the Bahamians that you were supposed to be managing a crisis. We're already going through it. We are looking to you for answers as our leaders, and no one can answer to us what for certain the numbers are coming out of that as missing, as presumed dead or dead, and no death certificates offered. It's just disastrous. And you have a new ministry that's supposed to help things to be better, and it just seems that it's been made worse. I'm embarrassed. I'm embarrassed to be saying our leaders did this mess after we've had a mess of Dorian.
Speaking of Dorian, we are coming up on the first anniversary of that disastrous hurricane. From the opposition's perspective, what are some of the major missteps of this government in the wake of Dorian?
Well, I would say when we went for the first press conference or press update from NEMA officials, we were there as the opposition, the official opposition. They were giving us briefings, and it was evident the number of areas in Grand Bahama and Abaco that needed to be evacuated. I mean, evident, strong requests for them. There were maps shown, and it were different colors, showed different levels of how much water would surge in these areas, and some of them, the red was just the worst. And it was well over almost half of Grand Bahama. At that meeting, our leader came out straight away and he said, I have to do a video right now on the steps of NEMA to send out a clarion call that our people have to be moved. And they're saying, oh, it's not mandatory evacuation in the law. Man, if you see the threat, act as a leader and tell the people, we will not allow you to stay in this, you're right in the path of the biggest threat. We needed to go out of our way to get them out of their homes.
If we can go back, though, to that Dorian situation, Prime Minister did appeal over and over. In fact, went to Grand Bahama, I think, at one point, and appealed to people to leave. But you had individuals who would not leave.
Yeah, but if you're appealing to people to leave, and then you're telling them, leave, and guess what? Find your way. You have some who couldn't even afford to buy the ticket. Are you telling me to leave because I'm in a danger zone, but I am telling you I don't have $1 to move?
So you're saying
if you make
there should have been provisions to move them?
Make the provisions. And after the fact, after the storm already hit, you're still telling them pay to come out? I mean, the planes just decided afterwards, when we started really complaining in the public, that, okay, we're going to start getting the people and bringing them over and finding shelter here for them. Even the shelters were flooded, but you identified. So you knew that it was coming, the time when it was going to be too dangerous for anyone to even make their way Why leave them there?
Just recently, the shelters list by the Ministry of Social Services and Urban Development in conjunction with NEBA noted there were no shelter lists for Central Abaco, Grand Bahama, Salina, Point Ackland, Spanish Wells, Eleuthera, and that evacuation plans should be considered. When you hear that, what does that tell you about the state of our preparedness and readiness?
You thought Dorian would have taught us something, right? How can evacuation plans be considered after what we've already experienced and knowing the state of those islands presently, that there isn't some way that you can just come up with shelter right away if a storm is on our back in the next week or 2 weeks. So evacuation plans should have been already prepared. It begs the question, what was the Minister of State for the Disaster Ministry doing since Dorian? Because we still have people that needs relief. We still have a lot of homes that needs to be repaired. Many persons still waiting on lines to get fed and food for their children. And we have no shelters in the same islands that were extremely hit by Dorian. So where are the plans and where is the hard work over the last 10 months from this new ministry, which should have been so energized to prove the point that there is a good reason why they exist? Where are the plans? That's what I would ask. If we are honestly trying to do things right by our people, if we don't do it before, after Dorian, we should have learned, and it should be in place.
Sometime last month, a proposal for a free trade zone and aragonite mining in Andros was leaked and garnered a whole lot of attention. Later on, the Prime Minister came out and said the government had not received or approved the proposal. What's your party's take on the proposal, and what troubled you the most about it?
The size, the amount of acreage, that is extremely too large for any foreign investor to come in and capitalize on and sit on and have control of. I mean, to just freely, openly even allow them to think that that would be considered is concerning, because we have long passed the point where we just sit back and accept anyone entering and saying, I just want this and I'm going to give you jobs. If you talk to any Bahamian, I went to fill up on my gas the other day, and I just started using my Senate plate since COVID, honestly, because of the stops. And the young man who usually helps me out, he said, oh, I didn't realize you were a senator. And he said, how can I be a senator? The next one came, well, how can I be an entrepreneur? I'm pumping gas, but I really want to own my own company. I want to be a businessman. These are the dreams and the hopes. Back then, with our parents, our grandparents, they wanted jobs. Now, our younger generation wants to provide the jobs. So we can't allow foreign investors to come in now and say, I'm giving jobs. We don't want that. Give us the training, give us the skill set, give us the mandate so that we can continue to be self-sufficient. That's what needs to happen from any foreign investor from here on out. You come in and you bring us the tools so we can do it and continue to do it for the rest of eternity.
Senator, I could talk to you for the whole night, but we've got to wrap up, and we've got lots more to discuss tonight from the opposition's perspective. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having
Thank you
me.
for doing a good job in the Senate. I mean, you're always out there giving great debates, and you really have set yourself up for a bright future in politics. Thank you very much. Stay with us. When we come back, we are joined by the Deputy Chairman of the Progressive Liberal Party. It's Ladies' Night on the record. Stay with us. Hello and welcome to On the Record, and the balanced, true and open debate you've been looking for. Welcome back. You're watching On the Record tonight. We're discussing governance during crisis, the opposition's perspective. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer, and this segment is brought to you by the Grand Bahama Power Company. Over the past 3 years, the Progressive Liberal Party has ensured It's held the government's feet to the fire. From the management of Hurricane Dorian to governance during the COVID-19 pandemic, the PLP has remained vocal and constantly seen advocating on behalf of the citizens of the Bahamas. My guest tonight is an attorney, former senator and deputy chairman of the Progressive Liberal Party, Robyn Lynes. As I said, going out of the last segment, it's Ladies' Night on the record.
Absolutely.
Glad to have you back.
Good to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
I wanted to get not just the opposition's perspective, but I wanted a female's perspective, because I think sometimes we think that politics is just a boys' club.
Right.
And, you know, sometimes some of the best discussions I have are when women are on the show, even when John Canoe, we talk about John Canoe.
I mean, you disrespected me with the Valley comment.
Yeah, it's a Valley, everybody knows that.
I forgive you for that.
In December, we can talk about that. June 9th, despite the closure of schools in the Bahamas due to the COVID-19 situation, Minister of Education, Jeff Lloyd, announced that the BGCSE examinations would begin July 13th. Your views on this decision by government to go ahead?
I struggled with that one. You know, I
Why?
struggled with that because this leading up to that announcement in June, the government had already expressed the postponement of these exams, and there was no definitive date as to when the exams would be had. When you say something like that, automatically mindsets shift. The students, the parents, the teachers, right? Additionally, you have a disruption to the atmosphere and to the way students have been taught. Their classrooms are disrupted. They're now homeschooling.
New environments.
And, yeah, absolutely. And also, you really don't know what they're dealing with in their homes. And access to education is not just necessarily the availability of it on a virtual portal. Access to education must also be assessed and determined by how much I'm learning. And that assessment is where the breakdown was. So if you say we've been able to provide teaching on channels, we've been able to provide teaching on the virtual portals, well, how do you assess how much of that the student is actually getting, understanding, interpreting, assessing? And so when this announcement was made, the first thing I did was I wanted to hear from parents and I wanted to hear from teachers. What were the teachers saying? This is a bad move for exams to be held this early, for our students to not be prepared. And also, what about teachers? What about the consultation? What about all of the conversations that had been had? What about the recommendations that were made by the Bahamas Union of Teachers, including deferring exams to a later date, a later time? You see, and a lot of times when this government makes decisions, this administration makes decisions, consultation is lacking from people who have to deal with the brunt of those decisions. And you have to understand something. If you look at our education scores from GLAT in grade 3, grade 6, BJC, BGCSE, after GLAT in grade 3, we have declining results. Our students are not doing as well. So couple that with all of what they've had to endure over the last few months, and to say, you know what, we're springing this on you now. You're going to have to take these exams. I think it was too much, too soon, and there wasn't sufficient consultation, and there wasn't a sufficient rollout for preparation.
Even though the ministry had always maintained that the exams would happen, I think they gave a date, said, you know, if we'll definitely pull the trigger by this date if we're not at a particular point of reopening. They'd always maintained that this would happen. And even though they said that the exams were optional.
But you see, the thing about it is the ministry has been contradictory. See, if you say the exams are optional, some students can take it. If you don't take it, then that's fine. But your reason for making the exams, kind of not making the exams, but your reason for bringing the exams to the forefront on July 13th is because you said these delays are causing problems for entrance into universities. Persons are going to need the results of these exams for employment, et cetera, et cetera. So it becomes a contradiction. If it is optional, something that is optional is not really considered that big of a deal. If the ministry is applying that kind of a careless approach to it. If you want to take it, take it. If you don't want to take it, no problem, don't take it. And then you put, to justify why you're doing it, you put such a heavy onus on the necessity of doing it as early as possible. It's contradictory. As a matter of fact, the University of the Bahamas changed their enrollment criteria from April. They changed their enrollment criteria and they said, we are going to be looking at the accumulative GPAs from grade 10 to grade 12 and the placement exam. And this is how we are going to allow students to enroll into the university, because we understand the delay as a result of this pandemic for BGCSEs. Schools all across the world did the same thing. So there was really no rush for the BGCSE results. And the ministry knows that. What should have been of paramount consideration is ensuring that our students were put in the best position to succeed in those exams.
Good point. Ministry earlier this week also announced a one-year moratorium on all new tuition grants for the upcoming academic year. Do you believe this was made in the interest of the students, or this was to just account for budget cuts?
Again, it's July. That announcement was made, I think, just a few days ago. I heard it anyway. I don't recall there being any conversations about this before. The students that I know that have applied for the scholarship grant were told after they had brought in all of their documentation and requirements, we're only waiting on cabinet to send the approval for what is necessary. So now in July, you make an announcement that, listen, we're not accepting any new applications at all. And you create a blanket approach. And the reasons that the ministry gave, one of the reasons was the fact that they said that documents that are required from international universities to be considered in the applications had not been given. Well, guess what? And I made the point already. Universities all over the world have relaxed their admission criteria, taking into consideration the fact that this is not local, this is not national. This is a global crisis, right? And so they have modified their entrance criteria to take into account the fact that students may not have certain national exams, etc. But this is the part that has really offended me and so many other students as it relates to this. You had students who had everything, all of their acceptances. Those students have been deprived of this opportunity. You have the northern campus in Grand Bahama of the university that is decimated, uninhabitable. You cannot teach there. Those students are going to be in the University of the Bahamas. When you are denying a student access to international education, has the government considered and assessed how much of what they want to study, their course, their disciplines are available at the university?
The university is saying something like some 6,000 students are being registered in the fall.
And to be honest with you, it may even be more than that. So what I'm saying is, if my course of discipline and study is not available at the University of the Bahamas, I should be given a different level of consideration than someone whose course is available. You also have the reality that there were students who were enrolled in hotspots in the United States and other parts. Their parents, guardians may make a decision that, you know what, I'm not going to send you back.
And some of them may not even be allowed in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You need to study home for this period. The University of Bahamas budget has been cut. Do they have the capacity to deal with all of these students when you look at student and faculty ratio, when you look at access to resources, when you look at social distancing requirements that may spill over into the fall semester? Do you have the spacing? Does the university have the platform to provide adequate virtual learning or distance learning for their students? So a lot of times these decisions, I think, have been made. They have a blanket approach as a kind of throw this down your, shove this down your throat. This is what we've decided. Then all of the questions come. Before you come to these conclusions, have some form of discourse with those persons that your decision will affect, so that the questions can be answered before you reach a conclusion.
We've got to switch gears a bit. July 1st, we reopened our borders, allowing for tourists to again travel to the Bahamas and allowing Bahamians as well to move in and out. Since then, though, we've seen an uptick in COVID-19 cases. Do you believe the set protocol for traveling, that's the negative PCR test within 10 days, is sufficient?
I think that it is in keeping with some international standards. I don't think it is sufficient by itself. What I wanted to see this administration do is increase protocols, procedures, and increase the manpower and readiness of our people at all of our borders. There's still a Nassau centrism, even as it relates to the preparedness of our response to the influx of our guests. The reality of it is 80% of our tourist arrivals come from the U.S. We should not at this point be allowing persons to come who are resident in hotspots like New York,
well, that was my next question.
California.
Should we
no,
be
absolutely
restricting
no.
people
We should
from
be
the
restricted.
hotspot areas?
Florida, you have Texas, etc. So even persons that are using these hotspots as transit points really should have a greater restrictions on them. What you don't see, though, is the readiness of all of our islands. You see, what is going on in Nassau in terms of our preparedness should be going on all the way from Grand Bahama to Inagua. That we are ready to deal with first responders. We're ready to deal with the health crisis in terms of our clinics, in terms of access to nurses and doctors, etc. This government is firing doctors at this point in time. During a health crisis, during this pandemic. So it's not just the testing. And again, one of the things that I wanted to see was not just a requirement for the type of test, but also where that test is being taken. Because the truth of the matter is there's very few things that you can't access online. You understand what I'm saying? And if it's not a reputable clinic or health service provider, how do we ensure the validity of the tests, understanding the history of these COVID-19 tests with false positives and false negatives? How does the government ensure that the test that is being produced by a visitor or an entrant into the country is actually a valid test taken by a reputable healthcare provider? So all of these things.
Along these same lines, just a recent press statement from the FNM under the headline, Failed Leader Brave Davis Trying to Use Deadly Virus as Political Opportunity. It talked about how early on the leader of the PLP criticized the government on shutting the country down, and then again criticized them when they were reopening, claiming that they were doing so too quickly. What's the response to that when the criticism is there are mixed messages coming from the leader of the opposition?
Well, I think what has happened is the government is being criticized, and instead of looking at the truth of that criticism and pulling out what is constructive from it, they've taken this kind of political stance to say everything the opposition says is being taken from a political perspective, and that is not the truth. The country shut down around the 27th of March or thereabout. There was a statement that the leader of the opposition made just a day or maybe 2 days after, and it was very clear. He said the party generally supports the initiatives being taken by the government. What we would want to see is the borders open for Bahamians to return. There was never a statement that said, we want the borders open for everyone. We understood that certain things needed to be put in place in order for us to get a handle on this pandemic that would affect us all. Open the borders for Bahamians that were in the States receiving medical care, that were still in school, that had traveled for some emergent matters. That was what the leader of the opposition said. Every press statement, every press release, every press conference that you have seen coming from the opposition, including the PLP task force, has always been lined with recommendations, always been a critique of what is going on, because that is our job, to hold the government accountable for what is happening in this country. But it was always been recommendations. The government, though, this administration, politicized this matter from the onset. Look at what they did in terms of their COVID-19 committee, the NCCC. no opposition representation. The Food Task Force, no opposition representation. The Economic Recovery Task Force, no opposition
Robyn, I'm going
representation.
to have to let's allow you to hit pause for a moment. We're going to take our break. I want us to pick up on this. We've got a couple more questions about the COVID-19 response.
Absolutely.
In our last segment, though, we will be discussing the emergency powers and what the opposition is saying is an abuse of those powers. Stay with us. We'll be back right after this.
Matt, where in the world is Matt Lauer? Where in the world is Ellison Greenslade? I'm so used to the
Listen,
while you were concentrating in Atlanta. So we can talk about it.
More on the record tonight, the government's purchase of the Grand Lotine is a hot subject in the news. And this is On the Record. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. Thanks for staying with us. In our final segment tonight, I'm joined by the Deputy Chairman of the Progressive Liberal Party, Robyn Lynes. As the COVID-19 numbers increase, I mean, and we've seen an increase, health officials told us to expect this second wave, some even call it a continuation of the first wave. We are looking at a dilemma I think many other countries are facing. You cannot remain closed forever, indefinitely. But how do you balance the health of the nation with the wealth of the nation? We've got to, some things have to happen. I mean, our economy is primarily dependent on tourism. How do you balance those things?
Well, first of all, I think the balance is not what should be our objective. You never balance what is replaceable with what is irreplaceable. Life is irreplaceable. So the well-being, the wellness, the health of our people is of paramount consideration. We may struggle financially, but we can recover. I can't bring you back if I leave you to I lose you to COVID-19. So I don't want to see the government trying to balance, and I think that's what they're trying to do at this point. Don't balance. Make sure that everything that we do is driven by a proper assessment of the risk to our country, to our people, and as well as to our
But
visitors.
how do you balance that when there is so much pressure for the economic side because you have a lot of people screaming for so many other things, and we're going to get to the emergency powers in a minute, but you have so much pressure on you as a government to do some basic things.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think one of the things that kind of crippled us in the domestic economy too was the decision of the government as it relates to the how the emergency powers, the lockdowns and the curfews apply to family islands much longer than they needed to. The way there was in the time of crisis, government's response has to be competent, it has to be coherent, it has to be compassionate, and it has to be consistent. This government failed on all of those levels in one way or the other. The competence is that it is driven by empirical evidence. It is driven by the data. We understand how we're opening our country, how we're opening our borders. Protocols are in place, procedures are in place. We know what it is that we're doing. You didn't see that because we are at a stage now, so many months after this pandemic has hit our shores, we have not tested 1% of our populace. We're still moving on symptomatic testing. We've tested about 0.65% of our population, all right? Way under 1%. And so because you don't have that random testing, because you don't have rapid testing, we really don't know where we are as a people in terms of the spread of this COVID-19 within our country. The difficulty becomes where you look at the fact that 80% of people are asymptomatic with extremely mild symptoms or no symptoms at all. How do we then start to make decisions about our readiness to do anything when we have not yet determined where we are in terms of the spread? All right? The second thing is you saw this kind of inconsistency where some businesses were closed and other businesses operating in the same functions were opened, right? You saw this inconsistency where islands were being punished. You had the prime minister talking to people as if they were children. You better behave, you better do this. And so we could have salvaged much more of our domestic economy, and it would have cushioned us better for whatever losses we would have experienced internationally.
To the Emergency Powers Act. Do you think, as some allege, that there has been, or these powers have opened the door for corruption and an abuse of power?
Well, absolutely. Again, and one of the things, you have to laugh so you don't cry. The Prime Minister, as the competent authority, has made himself that authority solely. That was the first error. The laws allow for the competent authority to be vested in a body of people, because accountability is very, very important. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. As it stands now, the Prime Minister is not obligated to confer, discuss, or debate what he decides to be what is necessary as these emergency powers are in effect with anybody. That was the first mistake that he made. The second mistake has been that there has been this kind of evolution of these emergency powers, this constant extension, and the numbers don't support it. We have not, see, when we closed our borders on the 27th, we had 0 deaths, right? We had about 11 confirmed cases. When we opened our borders, we had 11 deaths, and I can't remember how many confirmed cases.
We were probably down to about 4 or 5 active cases,
right.
Very few active cases.
You see what I'm saying? And so, but at that time, in the United States in March, the numbers were somewhere around 16,000 a day. When we opened on July 1st, it was 44,000. Now it's over 65,000 a day. So what I'm saying is, if we're making decisions, we have to make them and be sure that we are looking holistically at everything that's going on. And I am able to explain and say to you, this is where we are in the country, because this is where we have assessed the curve to be. This is where we've assessed our testing to be. This is where we've assessed our ability to deal with a surge because of the protocols we've put in place in our healthcare system, because of what we've done here, because of what we've done there. We were always asking for a cogent, coherent plan that we prepare for the possibility that, yes, once we open our borders, we are going to have the influx of persons that will be COVID positive. It is what it is. With a 10-day span between the test and the result, you really don't know what can happen in that period of time. The best we could do as a country is be as prepared as we possibly could be. That is where we're falling down.
I want us to get into unemployment as well. I wanted to touch on this. About 26,000 people and rising are receiving payouts from national insurance, $28.7 million. Yet, over 100 workers showed up into Abaco to work as a part of the Bakers Bay project.
Yeah. One of the things that, as a matter of public policy, that we've always applied and should always be applied.
And as a part of that, what should have happened given the amount of applications that came in for permits?
Yeah, well, I think it was 500, they said. Mm-hmm. And they were approved for 135. I heard a number like 300, and then, after the public outcry, they said, no, it was only 135. The thing about it is, what drives the public policy as it relates to work permits is the inability for that job to be done locally by a Bahamian. That's the public policy criteria. What has happened now, though, is that companies have been able to so easily suggest that these are jobs that are outside of the scope and capacity of Bahamians without more. Bakers Bay has alleged that these Mexican workers are going to be bringing a technical construction skill. Well, what is the measure of that? Do you understand what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. How do we determine that that is even factual? Because they said so? What Bahamians have you attempted to undertake this task and they have failed? So you know, when you are looking at those kinds of things, and then you know, my mind kind of gets busy because I'm thinking to myself, okay, Baker's Bay gave Bahamas Fast Ferries a $20 million contract. And, you know, our competent authority, our PM, is a shareholder in Fast Ferries. Is that an underlying reason as to why things are happening this way? Because I don't see any evidence to suggest that the work that those Mexican laborers are doing, Bahamians are incapable of doing. As a matter of fact, the only thing I perceive to be is cheap labor and the ability to work those persons without access to certain things like, you know, national insurance benefits, et cetera, and also the scale of pay that you would have to pay a Bahamian worker. We are not in a place in our country where we could entertain any foreign workers, and we have not allowed a company to establish through trial and error that Bahamians are incapable of doing that job.
Robyn, we've got to move on discussion forward. I've got several questions. This one, though, and it's something I present to a lot of opposition individuals when they come on. Critics of the PLP say that the best chances of winning the 2022 election will be getting your current leader, Philip Brave Davis, to step down to allow for a more youthful, vibrant leader to take over. What do you say to those types of comments? And I'm sure you do get them, people questioning whether Brave is the man to take the party to the next election.
That's interesting because the only persons making those comments, by and large, are people who are not supporters of the party in any event. And so non-supporters of the party, persons who would not vote PLP in any event, are driving this narrative. What I find a little amusing about it is a lot of FNMs that I've talked to have said, you know, if you guys want to win, you know, you got to look at Chester over Brave. So they're saying that we should look within our party and pit our deputy with our leader. But I've never heard the argument that there's an FNM representative who would be best to lead this country. They don't even include themselves in the discussion. The reality of it is that where the country is, we don't just need someone who's young. We need someone who understands the system and understands a nation that is in crisis to the level our nation is. Brave Davis is a statesman, a parliamentarian. He is an astute QC and he understands analytical problem solving. That is where we are. I don't know when we became a country where being young was the only criteria. I could be young and don't know what it is that I am doing. The country is demanding servant leaders in this season of our national existence. And, you know, show me a parliamentarian whose competence exceeds that of Brave Davis. Show me a parliamentarian whose abilities exceed him. Show me a parliamentarian whose understanding of the Westminster system exceeds him. Show me anyone. So if I am going to critique his ability to lead this country solely based on his age, I think I offend the process. This is about skill. This is about competence. This is not about age. And another thing I want to add to that, because a lot of people try to pit Chester Cooper with Brave Davis. Chester Cooper has said on the record, and on this record, that he is learning. He is understanding. There's so much that he is gleaning. I don't mind what anyone says. Crisis calls for crisis management. You don't bring someone into crisis management who may be able to do the task. You bring someone who's tried, who's tested, who is proven. And I dare someone to show me someone who exceeds that capacity when put against a Brave Davis. That is how I make my decision.
Robyn, thank you very much. Unfortunately, that's going to do it for tonight's show. Thank you for, again, coming on and giving us such a wonderful perspective. I really appreciated you coming on tonight.
I appreciate you having me. Thank you.
Taking this opportunity. You know, as we move to 2022, you'll be in that seat a lot more, I'm sure.
It'll be fun. It'll be fun.
That's going to do it for tonight's episode of On the Record. Governance during crisis, the opposition's perspective. And boy, what a perspective we had tonight with Senator JoBeth Coleby-Davis and Robyn Lynes. Special thanks goes out to my production and technical teams for making this show possible. And of course to you, our viewers, we couldn't do it without you. Remember to stay tuned to the latest on what's happening with COVID and around the country. Stay tuned to this network. Be sure and watch Our News Nightly, as well as follow Our News Bahamas on Facebook. See you next time, same place, same time, right here on The Record.